Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I bought an alien egg on the dark web, and now it's hatching. Alright, so I need to get something off my chest, and Reddit seems like the best place to spill this. I'm not expecting anyone to believe me, but maybe writing it out will help me process what the hell is happening. This all started about a month ago when my curiosity got the better of me, and I made a seriously stupid decision. Let me take you back to the beginning. I've always been a bit of a thrill seeker. You know, the kind of person who dives into the deep web just to see what I can find. I'm not into drugs or illegal stuff, but the dark web is a weird, fascinating place. Anyway, I was bored one night and came across this shady site selling all sorts of bizarre items. You name it, they had it. Cursed objects, supposedly haunted dolls, and even jars of vampire blood. It was all clearly a scam, but then I saw something that caught my eye. Alien egg, rare and authentic. The listing was full of poorly photoshopped images and wild claims about extraterrestrial life, but something about it intrigued me. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity, or maybe it was just the fact that it was late and I was half drunk. The seller claimed this egg was recovered from a UFO crash site in Roswell and was guaranteed to hatch if kept in the right conditions. It was laughably overpriced, but my curiosity and boredom got the better of me. I clicked buy, and after a couple of weeks, a small unmarked package arrived at my doorstep. I live alone in a small apartment, so there was no one to judge me for the dumb shit I do. The package was light, almost as if there was nothing inside. I opened it up to find a small black egg nestled in some straw. It was about the size of a large chicken egg, but had an eerie, almost pulsating sheen to it. Along with the egg was a single sheet of paper with vague instructions. Keep warm. Do not expose to light. I didn't think much of it. I mean, it was probably just some elaborate scam, right? I set the egg on a makeshift nest of blankets in the corner of my bedroom, keeping it covered and warm. Days went by, and nothing happened. I was starting to feel like an idiot for wasting my money on this, when things took a turn for the weird. About a week in, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange humming noise. My room was dark, but there was this faint bluish glow coming from the corner. I rubbed my eyes and saw the egg. It was glowing. The damn thing was actually glowing. I stumbled out of bed and got closer. The egg was warm to the touch, almost hot, and it felt like something was moving inside. I could see faint cracks forming on its surface. Now, I'm not a superstitious person, but this was freaky. I grabbed my phone and took a few pictures, intending to post them online for a laugh. But then, something strange happened. The second I snapped the picture, my phone screen went black. It wouldn't turn back on. I tried everything, but it was dead, completely fried. That should have been my first clue to get rid of the damn thing. But no, I was too intrigued. The next few days, the humming got louder, and the glow more intense. I started having trouble sleeping. Nightmares of shadowy figures and strange, indistinct whispers plagued me every time I closed my eyes. I was exhausted, paranoid, and jumpy. My friends started noticing, asking if I was okay. I just brushed it off as stress from work. Then one night, things escalated. I woke up to a loud crack, like a gunshot, followed by an eerie silence. I turned on my bedside lamp and saw the egg. It had split open. The inside was empty, save for some kind of thick, black goo. There was no creature, no alien baby, just this sticky, foul-smelling substance. I was both relieved and disappointed. I figured it was some kind of prank, and the alien was probably some elaborate hoax. I cleaned up the mess, throwing the egg and the goo into a trash bag. But then I noticed something else. The humming noise hadn't stopped. In fact, it was louder, and now it was coming from outside my bedroom. I crept out into the hallway, my heart pounding. The noise was coming from the living room. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the floor, was a trail of that same black goo leading to my couch. The humming was deafening now, almost like it was inside my head. I approached the couch, my hands trembling, and lifted the edge of the blanket draped over it. Underneath, staring back at me with eyes that glowed the same eerie blue as the egg, was a creature. It was small, no bigger than a cat, with slimy dark skin and elongated limbs. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and it let out this horrific guttural sound that made my skin crawl. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and landed hard on my arse. The creature didn't move. It just kept staring at me, its eyes boring into mine. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. Eventually, I managed to get up and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I could still hear the humming, but now it was mixed with that awful, guttural growl. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my room, clutching a kitchen knife, praying for morning to come. When the first light of dawn finally crept through my window, the humming stopped. I cautiously opened my bedroom door and peeked out. The living room was empty. The trail of goo was gone, and the creature was nowhere to be seen. But the relief was short-lived. I quickly realized the nightmare was far from over. The next day, I was a mess. I barely slept, and every little noise made me jump. I called in sick to work, too freaked out to function normally. I spent the day trying to convince myself that what I had seen was just some sleep-deprived hallucination, a product of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew it was real. I decided to investigate further, to see if I could find anything online about the creature or the seller of the egg. I fired up my laptop and searched for the site where I bought it, but it was gone. No trace, no cached pages, nothing. It was like it had never existed. Panic started to creep in. What had I gotten myself into? That night, I reluctantly went to bed, leaving the lights on in the living room. I kept a baseball bat next to me, just in case. As soon as I closed my eyes, the nightmares started again, more vivid and terrifying than before. I saw the creature, but it was bigger now, and there were more of them, crawling out of the walls and from under the furniture. They whispered in a language I couldn't understand, but the tone was menacing, filled with malice. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was still dark, and the house was eerily quiet, too quiet. I grabbed the bat and slowly made my way to the living room. The lights were still on, but the room felt different, colder, more oppressive. I checked every corner, under every piece of furniture, but the creature was nowhere to be seen. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the kitchen. I tightened my grip on the bat and crept towards the noise. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to claw its way through the walls. I reached the kitchen and flicked on the light, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it. The creature was perched on the countertop, its glowing eyes fixated on me. It was bigger now, about the size of a small dog, with its skin stretched tight over its bony frame. black ooze stripped from its mouth, pooling on the counter. It let out a low, guttural hiss and lunged at me. I swung the bat, connecting with a sickening thud. The creature screeched and fell to the floor, twitching. I didn't wait to see if it would get up. I kept swinging, bashing it over and over until it stopped moving. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I dropped the bat and stumbled back, my mind reeling. I needed to get rid of it. I grabbed a trash bag and carefully scooped the creature's remains into it, trying not to gag at the smell. I tied the bag shut and hauled it out to the dumpster behind my apartment building, praying no one would see me. When I finally got back inside, I scrubbed the kitchen clean, trying to erase any trace of the horror that had unfolded, but the damage was already done. The nightmares persisted, worse than ever. Each night, the creatures in my dreams grew larger and more numerous, their whispers more insistent. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that moved on their own, flickers of blue light in dark corners. My paranoia reached a fever pitch. I knew I was being watched, hunted. One evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out, to be around people. I went to a local bar, hoping the noise and company would drown out my fear. I drank more than I should have, trying to numb my mind, but it only made things worse. The faces around me started to blur, morphing into twisted, monstrous visages. I stumbled out of the bar and started walking home, my vision swimming. As I neared my apartment, I heard the humming again, louder and more insistent. I stopped, looking around wildly. The street was empty, but the shadows seemed to pulse and shift, alive with malevolent energy. I broke into a run, desperate to reach the safety of my home. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me, panting. The humming was everywhere now, a deafening chorus in my ears. I ran to my bedroom, intending to barricade myself in, but stopped short when I saw it. The egg, the same black egg I had thrown out, was sitting on my bed, whole and intact, glowing with that eerie blue light. I felt a cold hand grip my heart. This couldn't be real. I had destroyed the creature, thrown the egg away. How was it back? My hands trembled as I reached for the egg, intending to smash it once and for all. But as my fingers touched the surface, a jolt of electricity shot through me, and I was paralyzed. The egg cracked open, and a slimy, tentacled appendage shot out, wrapping around my wrist. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The tentacle tightened, and I felt a sharp pain as something pierced my skin. I collapsed to the floor, the room spinning around me. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw before everything went black was the creature emerging from the egg, its eyes glowing brighter than ever, filled with malevolent intelligence. When I woke up, I was back in my bed. The egg was gone, and there was no sign of the creature, but I knew it was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. I could feel it inside me, a dark presence that had taken root, feeding off my fear, and the humming. It never stopped. The next few days were a blur of terror and confusion. I could barely function. The constant humming in my head made it impossible to think clearly. I started avoiding mirrors, because every time I looked at my reflection, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me, just for a split second before vanishing. I was losing my grip on reality. I tried reaching out to friends, but they were distant, concerned, but skeptical. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown. One night, in a moment of desperation, I called my best friend, Mark. He listened patiently as I rambled about the egg, the creature, and the horrors I was experiencing. To my surprise, he agreed to come over. When Mark arrived, he took one look at me and knew something was seriously wrong. I must have looked like hell, gaunt, pale, and haunted. I showed him the spot where I had found the egg on my bed, the now clean kitchen where I'd killed the creature, and tried to explain the unexplainable. "Man, you need help. Real help. This isn't just stress," he said, his voice filled with concern. He suggested I see a doctor or a therapist, but I knew this wasn't something they could fix. There was something evil, something unnatural, and it was latched onto me. That night, with Mark sleeping on my couch for support, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely alone in this, but as the hours passed, that hope was shattered. Around midnight, the humming intensified, reverberating through the walls. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart racing. I could hear Mark stirring in the living room, his confused mutterings turning into shouts. I rushed out to find him standing in the middle of the room, wide-eyed with terror. "Do you hear that?" he yelled over the deafening hum. I nodded, and we both turned towards the kitchen where the noise was originating. The kitchen was a nightmare. The black ooze was back, seeping from the walls and pooling on the floor. And in the middle of it all was the creature, larger than ever, its eyes blazing with malevolent light. Tentacles writhed around its body, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. Mark backed away, his face pale. "What the hell is that thing?" he whispered, but there was no time for answers. The creature lunged at us faster than I could react. It grabbed Mark by the leg, pulling him towards it. He screamed, thrashing and kicking, but its grip was too strong. I grabbed the baseball bat, my mind blank with fear. I swung with all my might, hitting the creature's tentacles. It screeched, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that made my vision blur. I kept swinging, desperate to save my friend. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to free Mark, pulling him back towards the living room. We stumbled out the door, slamming it shut behind us. The humming was muffled now, but we could still hear it, vibrating through the walls. We didn't stop running until we were several blocks away, panting and shaking. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with disbelief and fear. "What the fuck is going on?" he demanded, but I had no answers. We ended up at a 24-hour diner, trying to collect ourselves. Mark was insistent that we needed to call the police or someone who could deal with this, but I knew it wouldn't help. This wasn't something they could understand or fight. I convinced him to stay with me at a motel for the night, promising we'd figure it out in the morning, but there was no figuring it out. The next day, I found my apartment completely normal. No black goo, no creature, no sign of the nightmare that had unfolded. Mark was skeptical, but he couldn't deny what he had seen. He agreed to stay with me for a few more days, but the tension between us was palpable. He was scared, and I didn't blame him. Each night, the humming returned, and each night, the creature grew bolder. It started appearing in my dreams again, but this time, Mark was there too. Both of us trapped in a twisted, nightmarish version of my apartment. We'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the sound of the creature's whispers lingering in our ears. I started noticing changes in myself. My reflection showed a gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger. My skin was pale, almost translucent, and I had a constant nagging pain in my chest. One night, as I was examining the mark on my wrist where the tentacle had pierced me, I noticed something moving under my skin, tiny writhing shapes like worms crawling just beneath the surface. Panic set in. I tried to dig them out, using a knife to cut into my flesh, but there was nothing there. Mark found me in the bathroom, blood dripping from my arm. Freaked out. He wanted to take me to the hospital, but I refused. I knew they wouldn't find anything. This was beyond medical help. The next night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep putting Mark in danger. I told him to leave, to get as far away from me as possible. He protested, but I was adamant. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to him because of me. Reluctantly, he agreed, promising to check in on me regularly. After he left, the apartment felt even more oppressive. The humming was constant now, a background noise that I couldn't escape. The creature appeared more frequently, its presence almost a permanent fixture in my nightmares. My health continued to decline, the pain in my chest growing worse. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt something burst inside me. A searing, white-hot pain radiated through my chest, and I screamed, clutching at my heart. The last thing I saw before blacking out was the creature standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing with a triumphant, sinister light. When I regained consciousness, the world was a blur of pain and confusion. My chest felt like it was on fire, and my vision swam with dark spots. I lay there, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had happened. The apartment was silent, the oppressive humming conspicuously absent for the first time in weeks. I managed to sit up, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through my chest. My shirt was soaked with sweat and blood, sticking to my skin in a clammy mess. I stumbled to the bathroom, desperate to see what was going on with my body. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I peeled off my shirt and gasped. My chest was a mess of red, inflamed flesh, with dark veins spreading out from a central point just above my heart. It looked like something was trying to burst out from inside me. I pressed a trembling hand to the spot, feeling a sickening squirming beneath my skin. Panic took over. I grabbed my phone, ignoring the flickering screen and the occasional static bursts, and called Mark. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. I was alone in this, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. I needed help, but I couldn't go to a hospital. They wouldn't understand, and I'd probably end up locked away in some psych ward. I had to figure this out on my own. I started searching online, looking for anything that could explain what was happening to me. Forums, dark websites, conspiracy theories, anything that might give me a clue. After hours of frantic searching, I found a cryptic post on an obscure message board. The author claimed to have had a similar experience involving an alien parasite. According to the post, the creature inside me was a symbiote, feeding off my fear and pain, growing stronger every day. The only way to get rid of it was to extract it surgically before it fully matured. The thought of cutting into myself again made me nauseous, but I was desperate. I gathered what supplies I could, knives, disinfectant, towels, and set up in the bathroom. The humming returned as I prepared, a mocking reminder of my impending doom. With trembling hands, I made the first incision. Pain shot through me, but I gritted my teeth and kept going, slicing deeper until I hit something hard. The symbiote. It writhed under my touch, and I nearly passed out from the pain and revulsion. I grabbed the tweezers and carefully started to pull it out. It was a grotesque, slimy thing, about the size of a golf ball, with tiny, grasping appendages. As I pulled it free, it let out a high-pitched screech that reverberated through my skull. I dropped it into a jar and sealed the lid, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I collapsed on the bathroom floor, drenched in sweat and blood, but alive. The pain in my chest was still there, but it was a different kind of pain. Cleaner, less oppressive. I cleaned and bandaged the wound as best I could, my body trembling with exhaustion. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could beat this thing. Maybe I could get my life back. But the humming didn't stop. It was softer now, less insistent, but it was still there. A constant reminder that I wasn't free yet. I spent the next few days recuperating, trying to regain my strength. The jar with the symbiote sat on the kitchen counter, a grim trophy of my ordeal. I didn't dare open it, but I could see the thing inside, pulsating and twitching, its tiny eyes watching me with malevolent intelligence. My dreams were still plagued by the creature, but they were different now. Instead of chasing me, it spoke to me, whispering dark secrets and twisted promises. It told me that it wasn't alone, that there were others out there, watching, waiting for their chance to strike. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a familiar pain in my chest. I bolted upright, clutching at the spot where I had removed the symbiote. My heart sank. There was another one, writhing just beneath the surface. Panic set in as I realized the truth. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I knew I couldn't stay here. The apartment was a trap, a breeding ground for these creatures. I had to get out, to find someone who could help me. I packed a bag with essentials, grabbed the jar, and fled into the night, the humming growing louder with every step. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't give up. I had to find a way to stop this, to rid myself of these horrors once and for all. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but I had no choice. I had to keep moving, to keep fighting, even if it cost me everything. The road stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of darkness and dread. The symbiote in the jar pulsated with an eerie glow, casting sinister shadows across the passenger seat. I drove aimlessly, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of fear and determination. I had no clear destination, just a desperate need to escape the horrors that had taken root in my life. I ended up in a small, desolate town, miles from anywhere. The kind of place where people mind their own business and strangers are met with suspicious glances. I found a rundown motel on the outskirts and paid for a room with cash, hoping to stay off the grid. As I settled into the dingy room, I could feel the symbiote's presence growing stronger, the humming louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't run forever. I needed to find a way to end this nightmare once and for all. I spent the next few days researching, scouring the internet for any lead, any clue that might help me. Eventually, I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to paranormal and extraterrestrial phenomena. Buried deep within the threads, I found a mention of a man known only as the Exorcist. According to the posts, he specialized in dealing with entities like the one that had latched onto me. With no other options, I decided to track him down. The forum posts hinted that he operated out of an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district of a nearby city. I gathered my things, including the jar with the symbiote, and set off once again. The warehouse was exactly as described, dilapidated, covered in graffiti, and seemingly abandoned. I hesitated at the entrance, the humming in my head now a deafening roar. Steeling myself, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and decay, the faint smell of chemicals lingering. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then from the shadows, a figure emerged. He was tall, with long, unkempt hair, and a face lined with age and experience. His eyes, however, were sharp and piercing, filled with an intensity that made me shiver. "You must be the one with the symbiote," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, too scared to speak. He gestured for me to follow, leading me to a makeshift lab set up in one corner of the warehouse. Strange equipment and jars filled with bizarre specimens lined the tables. "Put it here," he instructed, pointing to a metal tray. I placed the jar with the symbiote on the tray, watching as he examined it closely. "You have no idea what you've brought into your life," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "These creatures are ancient, malevolent. They feed on fear and pain, growing stronger with every drop of suffering." I told him about the second symbiote, the one still inside me. He listened intently, nodding. "We'll need to remove it, but it won't be easy. These things have a strong grip on their hosts. The process will be painful." I agreed, knowing I had no other choice. He prepared a series of tools and strange-looking devices, explaining each step in a calm, methodical manner. "Lie down," he instructed, and I complied, stretching out on a cold metal table. The procedure was excruciating. He used a combination of surgical instruments and what seemed like arcane rituals, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The pain was unbearable, but I bit down on a piece of leather he'd given me, refusing to scream. I could feel the symbiote writhing inside me, fighting back, its tentacles gripping my insides. Finally, with a sickening squelch, he pulled it free. The creature screeched, a sound that pierced my very soul. He quickly sealed it in another jar, placing it next to the first one. I lay there panting, my body trembling with exhaustion and pain. "It's done," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But we're not finished yet. These things are resilient. We need to destroy them completely." He led me to a furnace at the back of the warehouse. The heat was intense, the flames roaring hungrily. He handed me the jars, and I hesitated for just a moment before throwing them into the fire. The symbiote screeched, the glass shattering and melting in the intense heat. For a moment, the humming in my head grew unbearable, then suddenly stopped. Silence. Blessed, peaceful silence. I collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down my face. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. The exorcist helped me to my feet, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "You're free," he said simply. "But remember, these things are out there. Be careful what you delve into." I thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. I knew I would never be the same, that the horrors I'd experienced had left a permanent mark on my soul. As I left the warehouse and stepped into the sunlight, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had survived. I had fought back against the darkness and won. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The world seemed darker, more sinister. I knew there were more things out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. And I vowed to never let my curiosity lead me down such a dark path again. For now, though, I was free. The symbiotes were gone, their malevolent presence nothing more than a terrible memory. I would carry the scars with me forever, a reminder of the horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. But I was alive, and that was enough. At least I hoped it was. I found my clone on the dark web, created by aliens. Alright, so I've been debating for a while whether or not to share this story, but after a lot of thought, I've decided I need to get it out there. Maybe someone will believe me, or maybe it'll just help me process the insanity that's become my life. Either way, here it goes. It all started about 6 months ago. I'm a pretty average guy, 28, single, working a dead-end job at a tech support center. You know, the kind where you spend 8 hours a day getting yelled at by people who don't know how to turn their computers on and off again. My social life is minimal at best, so I end up spending a lot of time online. I'm not proud to admit it, but I've ventured into the darker corners of the internet more than once. Curiosity gets the better of me, and sometimes I just need an escape from my mundane life. One night, I stumbled upon a forum discussing the dark web. For those of you who don't know, the dark web is like the Wild West of the internet. It's full of illegal activities, shady deals, and some seriously messed up stuff. Most of it is just rumors, urban legends, and scare tactics, but some of it's real. I've heard stories about black markets, hitmen for hire, and even human trafficking. But this forum was talking about something different: cloning. I was intrigued. The idea of cloning seemed more like sci-fi than reality, but the people in this forum were adamant that it was happening. They shared links, screenshots, and even supposed testimonies from people who claimed to have seen their own clones. It sounded like a bad horror movie plot, but I couldn't look away. I spent hours scrolling through the posts, my curiosity growing by the minute. Eventually, I found a link buried in one of the threads. It led to a dark web marketplace. Not just any marketplace, but one dedicated to human cloning. My heart was pounding as I clicked on it. The site was minimalistic, with a black background and white text. It listed various services offered by what they called the syndicate. It was all very cryptic, but the gist was clear. They claimed to be able to create a clone of anyone for a hefty price. I was skeptical, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know more. There was an email address at the bottom of the page, so I decided to reach out. I sent a short message asking for more information and stating that I was interested in their services. I half expected my email to bounce back or get flagged by some kind of spam filter, but to my surprise, I got a response within an hour. The email was from someone calling themselves Operator X. They asked for a substantial payment in Bitcoin for a consultation. The amount was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I was about to close the email and forget the whole thing when I noticed a note at the bottom. It read, "For a taste of our capabilities, visit the attached link. Password, mirror." My curiosity was piqued again. I followed the link, entered the password, and was taken to a video. The screen was dark at first, but then it flickered to life. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. He was sitting in a dimly lit room, staring directly into the camera. I watched in horror as he started speaking. "Hello, Nathan," he said. My name. He knew my name. "You've been chosen for an extraordinary opportunity. We've been watching you, and we believe you're the perfect candidate for our project. If you proceed, we'll make a clone of you, an exact replica, down to the smallest detail. But be warned, this process is irreversible. Once it begins, there's no turning back." The video cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at a blank screen. I felt like I was going to be sick. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank or a deepfake video, but deep down, I knew it was real. The way he moved, the way he spoke, it was too perfect to be fake. Against my better judgment, I replied to Operator X, asking for more details. They responded almost immediately, this time with instructions. They wanted me to go to a specific location in the city, a rundown warehouse in an industrial district. They said I would meet an agent there who would explain everything. They also reiterated the payment, reminding me that without it, there would be no deal. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the video, about the clone that looked and sounded exactly like me. I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I found a website on the dark web that claimed to make human clones, and that I'd seen a video of myself. They'd laugh me out of the station. The next day, I called in sick to work and withdrew all the money I had in my savings account. It wasn't much, but it was enough to convert to Bitcoin and make the payment. I followed the instructions to the letter, sending the money to the wallet address they provided. Within minutes, I received a confirmation email with the location and time of the meeting. That evening, I drove to the warehouse. The area was desolate, with abandoned buildings and broken streetlights. I parked my car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. My heart was pounding, and my mind was racing with thoughts of what might happen. Was this a trap? Was I walking into some kind of elaborate scam? Or was it something far worse? When I reached the warehouse, I saw a man standing outside. He was tall, with a shaved head and dark sunglasses, despite it being night. He nodded as I approached and motioned for me to follow him inside. The warehouse was dark and smelled of rust and decay. We walked through a maze of corridors until we reached a small, dimly lit room. Inside, there was a table with a laptop and several documents spread out. The man introduced himself as Agent Smith, which I'm sure wasn't his real name. He explained that the syndicate was a highly advanced organization with the technology far beyond anything the public was aware of. They had the ability to create perfect human clones, indistinguishable from the original. As he spoke, I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. This was insane. I was sitting in a rundown warehouse, talking to a stranger about cloning, but there was something about the way he spoke, the confidence in his voice, that made me believe him. Agent Smith handed me a contract and a pen. He explained that by signing it, I was agreeing to undergo the cloning process, and that the syndicate would have complete control over my clone. In return, I would receive a substantial payment, more money than I'd ever dreamed of. But there was a catch. The clone would not just be a copy of me. It would be enhanced, improved in every way, and it would be used for purposes that I was not allowed to know. I hesitated. This was crazy. But then I thought about my life, my dead-end job, my lack of prospects, my loneliness. Maybe this was my chance to do something extraordinary, to be part of something bigger than myself. Without thinking any further, I signed the contract. As soon as I did, Agent Smith smiled and shook my hand. He told me to wait there and left the room. I sat alone in the dim light, feeling a mixture of excitement and dread. After what felt like an eternity, he returned with a small vial of liquid and a syringe. "This will put you to sleep," he said. "When you wake up, the process will be complete." I nodded and took the syringe. My hands were shaking as I injected the liquid into my arm. Within seconds, I felt my consciousness slipping away. The last thing I remember was Agent Smith's face, watching me as I drifted into darkness. When I woke up, everything had changed. I woke up in a cold sweat, my head pounding. I was lying on a metal table under harsh fluorescent lights. The room was sterile, almost like a hospital, but there was something off about it. The walls were bare, and the only furniture was the table I was on and a chair in the corner. My clothes were gone, replaced by a flimsy hospital gown. Panic set in as I tried to make sense of where I was and what had happened. Suddenly, the door creaked open and a man in a lab coat walked in. He was tall and thin, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. He introduced himself as Dr. Hughes, the lead scientist of the Syndicate's cloning project. He had an air of authority and detachment that made my skin crawl. "Welcome back, Nathan," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "The procedure was a success. Your clone has been created and is currently being conditioned." I sat up, my mind racing. "Conditioned? What does that mean?" Dr. Hughes gave me a thin smile. "We are enhancing your clone, making improvements to its physical and mental capabilities. It will be superior to you in every way. Faster, stronger, more intelligent. It will be the perfect version of you." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't what I had signed up for. "What happens to me now?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at me with those cold eyes. "You will be compensated as promised, but there are certain precautions we need to take to ensure the success of the project." Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened again, and two burly men entered. They grabbed me by the arms and lifted me off the table. I struggled, but they were too strong. They dragged me down a series of corridors, past rooms filled with strange equipment and more people in lab coats. The whole place had an eerie, clinical vibe that made my skin crawl. We reached a room at the end of a long hallway. Inside, there was a large glass cylinder filled with a thick, greenish liquid. It looked like something out of a sci-fi horror movie. The men shoved me inside and strapped me to a metal frame. I tried to scream, but one of them shoved a gag into my mouth. Dr. Hughes appeared in front of me, holding a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "This will help you relax," he said, injecting it into my arm. "You'll feel a bit disoriented, but it's necessary for the next phase." The liquid burned as it entered my bloodstream, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The room started to spin, and my vision blurred. Last thing I saw before everything went dark was Dr. Hughes's cold, emotionless face. When I came to, I was in a different room. This one was small and dimly lit, with a single bed and a metal door. I was no longer strapped down, but I felt weak and disoriented. My limbs were heavy, and my head was pounding. I tried to stand up, but my legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor. After what felt like hours, the door finally opened, and a woman walked in. She was dressed in a lab coat, but she had a kinder face than Dr. Hughes. She helped me back onto the bed and gave me a glass of water. "You've been through a lot," she said gently. "My name is Dr. Miller. I'm here to help you." I sipped the water, trying to get my bearings. "Where am I? What's going on?" Dr. Miller sighed. "You're in a secure facility. We had to sedate you to ensure the safety of the project. Your clone is almost ready, but there are still a few final adjustments to be made." I felt a surge of anger. I didn't agree to this. I didn't sign up to be a guinea pig. She nodded sympathetically. "I know this is difficult, but you did sign the contract. And once the project is complete, you'll be free to go with the payment you were promised." It was hard to argue with that. I had agreed to this even if I hadn't fully understood what I was getting into. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. Over the next few days, Dr. Miller monitored my condition and gradually explained more about the project. The Syndicate wasn't just creating clones. They were using advanced technology to enhance them, making them superior in every way. The process involved genetic modification, neural conditioning, and a host of other techniques that sounded like something out of a mad scientist's lab. As I recovered, I was allowed to walk around the facility under supervision. I saw other clones being prepared, each one an exact replica of someone else. It was eerie, seeing so many identical faces, all being turned into something more than human. One day, as I was walking down one of the corridors, I caught a glimpse of my own clone. He was standing in a glass-walled room, hooked up to various machines. He looked just like me, but there was something different in his eyes, a cold, calculated intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. Dr. Hughes appeared beside me, his presence as unsettling as ever. Impressive, isn't it? He's almost ready. Just a few more adjustments and he'll be perfect. I felt a surge of anger and fear. What happens to me when he's done? Dr. Hughes gave me that thin smile again. You'll be free to go, as promised, but you'll need to be careful. The world isn't ready to know about our work yet, and there are those who would do anything to keep it a secret. I didn't trust him, but I didn't have much choice. I had to play along, bide my time until I could figure out a way to escape this nightmare. But the more I learned about the project, the more I realized just how deep I was in. The syndicate had connections everywhere, in the government, in major corporations, even in law enforcement. They had the resources and the power to make me disappear if they wanted to. And the more I saw of my clone, the more I realized just how dangerous this technology could be. My clone wasn't just a copy of me. He was a weapon, a tool for the syndicate to use as they saw fit. And I was expendable. I knew I had to get out, but escaping wasn't going to be easy. The facility was heavily guarded, and I was constantly being watched. I started to plan, to look for weaknesses in the security, to find a way to get a message out. But time was running out. My clone was almost ready, and once he was, my fate was sealed. I couldn't let that happen. I had to find a way to stop them, to expose the truth, to save myself from this nightmare. But I was up against something far bigger and more powerful than I could have ever imagined. Over the next few days, I kept up appearances, pretending to comply with their procedures while secretly planning my escape. My mind raced with every possible scenario, each more desperate than the last. I knew I had to be careful, though. One wrong move, and I'd end up on a slab in some unmarked grave. Dr. Miller became my reluctant ally. I don't know if it was guilt or genuine concern, but she began slipping me small pieces of information, a guard's shift schedule here, a security code there. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start forming a plan. She told me about a maintenance tunnel that ran underneath the facility, a relic from when the building had been part of an old industrial complex. It was my best shot at getting out. The night I chose to escape was stormy, with thunder rumbling in the distance. The sound of the rain would help mask any noise I made. I waited until the middle of the night, when the guards were at their drowsiest, and made my move. I slipped out of my room and crept down the dimly lit corridors, every shadow and creak making my heart race. I reached the door to the maintenance tunnel without incident, thanks to the security code Dr. Miller had given me. As I opened the heavy metal door, the musty smell of damp earth and old machinery hit me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. The tunnel was dark and narrow, lit only by the occasional flickering bulb. I moved quickly, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Halfway through the tunnel, I heard voices behind me. Panic surged through my veins. They must have noticed I was gone. I picked up the pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, but finally, I saw a faint light ahead. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs and lungs. I emerged from the tunnel into a small clearing behind the facility, hidden from the main road by thick bushes. The rain was pouring down, soaking me to the bone, but I didn't care. I was free, at least for the moment. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd have to go to find help, but anything was better than going back. I started running, my legs feeling like lead. The rain made the ground slippery, and I stumbled more than once, but I kept going. I didn't stop until I reached a small town about 5 miles away. I found a payphone and dialed 911, my hands shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. The operator must have thought I was crazy, but she sent a patrol car to my location anyway. When the police arrived, I was exhausted, soaked, and half mad with fear. They took me to the station, where I tried to explain everything: the syndicate, the cloning, the experiments. I knew I sounded insane, but I had to make them believe me. They took my statement, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Just when I thought all hope was lost, Dr. Miller walked into the station. She had risked everything to follow me, to back up my story. She handed over documents, photos, and recordings, everything she had gathered to expose the syndicate. The officers' skepticism turned to shock as they went through the evidence. Finally, they started to believe us. The next few days were a blur. The police raided the facility, arresting Dr. Hughes and the other scientists involved. The media caught wind of the story, and it became a nationwide scandal. The syndicate's operations were exposed, and the technology they had developed was seized by the government. But my clone, my perfect, enhanced clone, was still out there. They had lost track of him during the raid, and despite their best efforts, they couldn't find him. The thought of him, out there somewhere, was a constant source of fear and anxiety. The government offered me protection, a new identity, and a chance to start over. I took it, but the nightmares followed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my clone's cold, calculating eyes staring back at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Months passed, and life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. I got a new job, a new place to live, and tried to move on, but the fear never really went away. I was always looking over my shoulder, always expecting him to show up and finish what the syndicate had started. One night, as I was walking home from work, I felt a chill run down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching me. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, but the figure followed. I turned a corner and broke into a run, my mind racing with thoughts of what he would do to me if he caught me. I reached my apartment building and fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. I finally got the door open and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with trembling fingers. I pressed my back against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then I heard it, a faint tapping on the window. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, standing just outside, was my clone. He looked just like me, but his eyes were filled with a cold, predatory intelligence. He smiled, a chilling, emotionless smile, and mouthed the words, "I'm coming for you." I knew then that I would never be free, never be safe. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, he would always be there. lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to take my place. The days following that terrifying encounter were a blur of paranoia and fear. I moved out of my apartment immediately, switching to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. I barely slept, constantly checking the windows and doors, jumping at every little noise. I knew he was out there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment. I couldn't live like this, always running and hiding. I had to find a way to stop him before he got to me. I needed help, but who could I trust? Dr. Miller was the only person who had believed me from the start, so I reached out to her. She was reluctant to meet in person, fearing for her own safety, but she agreed to help me. We met at a small cafe, far from the city center. Dr. Miller looked exhausted, the weight of the entire ordeal showing in her eyes. She handed me a file filled with information about the syndicate's cloning process and details about my clone's enhancements. It was a lot to take in, but one thing was clear. He was stronger, faster, and more intelligent than I could ever be. "We need to draw him out," Dr. Miller said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's hunting you, but he won't expect you to go on the offensive. We need to set a trap." The plan was simple but risky. We would use me as bait, drawing him to a location where we could neutralize him. Dr. Miller had connections with a few people who had once been part of the syndicate, people who had since turned against them. They could provide us with the tools we needed to level the playing field. We decided on an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the town. It was isolated enough that we wouldn't draw attention, but had enough space for us to maneuver. We set up cameras and traps, turning the place into a makeshift fortress. Every creak of the old building made my heart race, but I forced myself to focus. This was my only chance. The night of the plan, the tension was unbearable. Dr. Miller and I waited in the control room, watching the monitors. The warehouse was dark, lit only by the occasional flickering bulb. The silence was deafening, each minute feeling like an hour. Then we saw him, my clone, moving with a predatory grace, slipping through the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him on the screen. He looked so calm, so confident. He knew I was here, and he was coming for me. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the control room, making my way through the darkened corridors. I needed to lure him into the main hall, where we had set the traps. My footsteps echoed off the concrete floor, each step feeling like a countdown to my doom. As I entered the main hall, I saw him standing there, waiting. It was like looking into a twisted mirror. He smiled, that same chilling, emotionless smile, and took a step forward. "Hello, Nathan," he said, his voice sending shivers down my spine. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" I tried to stay calm, but fear gripped me. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice shaking. "I won't let you take my life." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Your life? I am your life. I am everything you should be, everything you could never achieve. And now, I'll take my place." He lunged at me, moving faster than I could react. I barely managed to dodge, feeling the rush of air as he passed by. I stumbled, falling to the ground, but I scrambled to my feet, trying to put the distance between us. The traps were set, but I needed to get him into position. I ran, leading him through the maze of corridors, hoping he would take the bait. He followed, relentless and unyielding, always just a step behind. Finally, we reached the central chamber, where Dr. Miller was waiting. She activated the traps, metal shutters slamming down to seal the exits. My clone stopped, realizing too late what was happening. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a cold fury. "This won't stop me," he hissed. "I'll always be one step ahead." But Dr. Miller had one final trick up her sleeve. She had rigged the room with an electromagnetic pulse device, something designed to disrupt the enhancements the syndicate had implanted in my clone. She activated it, and a low hum filled the room. My clone convulsed, his body jerking as the pulse hit him. He fell to the ground, twitching and convulsing, his eyes rolling back in his head. I watched in horror and relief as the enhancements failed, leaving him helpless. Dr. Miller rushed forward, injecting him with a sedative to keep him down. We had done it. We had stopped him. But as I looked down at his motionless form, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The syndicate was still out there, and they wouldn't take this defeat lightly. Dr. Miller and I left the warehouse, the weight of what we had done settling over us. We had won the battle, but the war was far from over. We needed to stay vigilant, to keep fighting, because the syndicate wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. As we drove away, I looked back at the darkened warehouse, a sense of dread settling in my gut. My clone might be down, but the syndicate was still out there, and they would come for us. I knew then that my life would never be the same. I was a marked man, hunted by a powerful shadowy organization, but at least now I wasn't alone. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I couldn't shake the image of my clone's cold smile and the promise in his eyes. Every creak, every shadow, every unexpected sound made my heart race. I knew he was out there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I went to the police, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. I tried to explain my situation, but they looked at me like I was insane. How do you convince someone that your own clone is hunting you down? In the end, they offered me a protection detail, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. My clone was smarter, faster, and more ruthless than I could ever be. One night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I packed a bag with essentials and left my apartment, slipping into the night like a fugitive. I knew I had to disappear, to get off the grid and find a place where he couldn't find me. I took cash, ditched my phone, and bought a bus ticket to a small town in the middle of nowhere. For a while, it seemed to work. I found a cheap motel and laid low, avoiding contact with anyone who might remember me, but the fear never really went away. Every night, I dreamed of my clone, his cold eyes staring at me from the darkness. Every morning, I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. One evening, I was walking back to my motel room when I felt that familiar chill. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a figure in the shadows, watching me. My clone had found me. Panic surged through me as I quickened my pace, my mind racing with thoughts of how to escape. I reached my room and locked the door, but I knew it wouldn't stop him. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. As I paced the room, my eyes fell on the small, outdated TV. The news was on, and the headline caught my attention. Dr. Hughes found dead in apparent suicide. My blood ran cold. If Dr. Hughes was dead, that meant the syndicate was cleaning house, tying up loose ends, and that meant they wouldn't stop until I was dealt with too. Desperation gave me clarity. I needed to confront my clone, to end this once and for all. Running wouldn't save me. Hiding wouldn't protect me. I had to face him, to find out what he wanted and why he was hunting me. I took a deep breath and left the motel, heading towards the town's abandoned industrial district. It was the perfect place for a final showdown, isolated, with plenty of places to hide. As I made my way through the dark, empty streets, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was it. One way or another, it would end tonight. When I reached the industrial district, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see my clone standing there, his expression unreadable. He looked exactly like me, but there was something in his eyes that set him apart, a cold, calculating intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. "It's over," I said, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" He smiled, a chilling, emotionless smile. "I was created for a purpose, Nathan, to be better than you in every way, and now I'm here to take your place." I felt a surge of anger. "You're just a copy. You can never be me." His smile widened. "That's where you're wrong. I am you, but better, stronger, smarter, and once you're gone, no one will ever know the difference." I realized then that there was no reasoning with him. He was determined to take my life, to replace me completely, and I couldn't let that happen. We circled each other, the tension thick in the air. Then he lunged at me, faster than I could react. We grappled, our identical faces inches apart, each fighting for survival. He was stronger, but I had something he didn't, a desperate will to live. We fought brutally, using anything we could find as weapons. Broken pipes, shards of glass, even our bare fists. The pain was excruciating, but I refused to give up. I couldn't let him win. In the end, it came down to a single moment of clarity. As we struggled, I managed to grab a piece of rebar and drove it into his chest. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of humanity in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He collapsed to the ground, his lifeblood pooling around him. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hands shaking. It was over. I had won. But as I looked down at his lifeless body, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like a part of me had died with him. I stumbled out of the industrial district, my mind numb with shock. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I had defeated my clone, but at what cost? My life would never be the same. The syndicate was still out there, and they would come for me eventually. But for now, I was free. I had survived, and that was enough. It's been a year since that night. A year of trying to piece my life back together, to find some semblance of normalcy. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and started over. But the memories of what happened still haunt me. I see my clone's face every time I look in the mirror. I hear his voice in my nightmares, whispering that he'll come back for me. I know it's irrational, that he's dead and gone, but the fear never really goes away. The syndicate has gone underground, their operations hidden from public view. Dr. Miller disappeared shortly after the raid, and I have no idea if she's alive or dead. The police and the government have done their best to keep the whole incident under wraps, but whispers and rumors still circulate. I've tried to move on, to build a new life, but it's hard. Every time I make a new friend, start a new job, I wonder if they'll recognize me, if they'll see through my disguise. I live in constant fear that the syndicate will find me, that they'll send another clone to finish what the first one started. But I've learned to be vigilant, to trust no one completely. I've taken self-defense classes, learned how to disappear if I need to. I keep a go bag packed with essentials, ready to run at a moment's notice. Some nights, when the fear and the memories are too much to bear, I think about ending it all. But then I remember the fight, the will to survive that got me through that night. I remember that I beat my clone, that I proved I was stronger, and that gives me the strength to keep going. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe the syndicate will find me. Maybe they won't. Maybe I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next threat to appear. But I do know one thing. I won't go down without a fight. This is my life, my story, and no one, not a clone, not the syndicate, not anyone, will take it from me. I found a deep web journal of a government agent hiding alien secrets. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be one to share something like this, but I guess there's a first time for everything. I've been debating whether or not to post this for weeks. Honestly, I don't know if I'll regret this, but here it goes. This might get long, so buckle up. A little backstory. I'm a pretty normal guy. I work a standard 9-5 in IT, and like many of you, I occasionally find myself browsing the internet late at night, falling down various rabbit holes. I've always been fascinated by conspiracy theories, urban legends, and the like. A few months ago, I got curious about the deep web. I'd read enough to know how to access it safely, so I decided to take a look around. For those who don't know, the deep web is a part of the internet not indexed by standard search engines, often shrouded in mystery and rumors of illegal activities. I was exploring different forums and marketplaces, not really expecting to find anything of note. Most of it was just as you'd expect. Black market stuff, shady services, and forums discussing things that would make your skin crawl. But one night, I stumbled upon something that would change my life forever. There was this thread titled "Unveiling the Secrets." It had only a few views and no replies, which struck me as odd. The user who posted it had a name like Agent X42, and the message was simple. For those seeking the truth, the real truth about our world, download the file below. But beware, knowledge comes at a price. I know it sounds cliche, but curiosity got the best of me. I downloaded the file, which was a massive encrypted journal. It took me hours to crack the encryption. When I finally did, I was left staring at an extensive document, hundreds of pages written by someone claiming to be a government agent. The journal started innocuously enough. Descriptions of mundane surveillance, boring stakeouts, and office politics. But the deeper I read, the darker it got. The agent, who I'll call John for simplicity, started detailing his involvement in a secret project called Operation Nexus. This was where things took a turn for the bizarre. John's journal recounted his first encounter with extraterrestrial life. According to him, the government had been in contact with aliens for decades, working together on various clandestine operations. But these weren't the benevolent, wise beings often depicted in sci-fi movies. No, these were something else entirely, cold, calculating, and disturbingly human-like in their cruelty. John described one particular incident that still haunts me. He was called to a secure facility in the Nevada desert. The place was heavily guarded, with security tighter than anything he had ever seen. Inside, he was taken to an underground lab where they were experimenting on what they called subjects. These subjects were human-alien hybrids, grotesque amalgamations of both species. John wrote about their twisted, malformed bodies, their eyes filled with a mix of pain and fury. They were kept in small, dark cells, subjected to horrific experiments to test their limits. The descriptions of these experiments were nauseating: electroshock, vivisection without anesthesia, forced impregnation, and more. I won't go into more detail, but you get the idea. John's horror was palpable. He described the screams echoing through the facility, the smell of burning flesh, and the sight of these poor beings clawing at their confines, desperate for any semblance of mercy. The scientists and military personnel treated these hybrids like lab rats, showing no empathy or remorse. John wrote about his growing sense of dread, realizing that he was complicit in this nightmarish project. One night, John was tasked with transporting one of the subjects to a different facility. This particular hybrid was different. It seemed more human, almost like a child. John described its wide, fearful eyes and the way it clung to him, sensing he was its only chance of escape. Against his better judgment, he decided to help it. He managed to sneak it out, driving for hours to a remote cabin he owned. Over the next few days, John learned more about the hybrid. It couldn't speak, but communicated through gestures and expressions. It showed him scars and wounds from the experiments, pointing to its head as if trying to convey a message. John eventually realized it was trying to tell him about its telepathic abilities. Through their silent interactions, John uncovered a terrifying truth. These hybrids were the result of a breeding program designed to create a new species, one that could be controlled and weaponized. The aliens, working with rogue elements of the government, were planning something huge, something that could threaten the very existence of humanity. John's entries became increasingly frantic. He wrote about how he was being hunted, how he couldn't trust anyone. He described black vans parked outside his home, mysterious phone calls, and shadowy figures following him. The hybrid grew weaker by the day, its health deteriorating from the years of abuse. The final entries were the most disturbing. John wrote about a night when he woke up to find the hybrid missing. There were signs of a struggle, broken furniture, blood on the floor. He knew they had found him. The last thing he wrote was a desperate plea for whoever found his journal to expose the truth. I finished reading the journal with a sense of profound unease. It felt too real to be a fabrication. The level of detail, the raw emotion, it was unlike anything I'd ever read before. I knew I had stumbled upon something significant, something dangerous. I debated for days whether to share this, but ultimately I felt I had to. People need to know what's happening, the horrors that are being concealed from us. I don't know if this will be taken down or if they'll come after me next, but if you're reading this, be careful. The truth is out there, and it's far more terrifying than we could ever imagine. After posting the first part of the journal, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of my house set my nerves on edge. My phone buzzed incessantly, with notifications from people reacting to my story. Many were skeptical, calling it a hoax, but a surprising number of people believed me. Some even shared their own eerie experiences with the deep web or strange government encounters. It was both comforting and disturbing to know I wasn't alone. I had to know more. I dived back into the journal, hoping to uncover more about John's journey. The next section of his journal took a deeper dive into the government's involvement with the aliens and the horrifying extent of their experiments. John was recruited for Operation Nexus, right out of the military. At first, he thought it was a standard classified operation. He was briefed on the existence of extraterrestrial life and the ongoing negotiations with an alien race known as the Icarus. These beings were far more advanced than humanity, with technology that could manipulate time and space. The government saw an opportunity to harness this power, but the Icarus had their own agenda. The collaboration started with simple technology exchanges. The Icarus provided devices that could revolutionize medicine, energy, and transportation. In return, they demanded human subjects for their experiments. Initially, these subjects were condemned criminals, the homeless, and the mentally ill. People society had forgotten, but as the experiments grew more ambitious, the pool of subjects expanded to include ordinary citizens who would simply disappear without a trace. John's journal detailed one particularly disturbing project known as Echo. The goal was to create a telepathic link between humans and Icarus, ostensibly to foster better communication. The reality was much darker. The process involved implanting a device into the human brain, a procedure that often resulted in horrific side effects. Subjects would experience excruciating pain, their bodies convulsing uncontrollably as the device interfaced with their neural pathways. Those who survived were never the same. Many were left catatonic, their minds shattered beyond repair. One entry described a woman named Sarah. She was a young mother who had been abducted on her way home from work. John wrote about how she was brought into the lab, strapped to a metal table, her eyes wide with terror. He watched as the scientist drilled into her skull, the sound of bone cracking echoing through the sterile room. Sarah screamed until her vocal cords gave out, her body writhing in agony. When the procedure was over, she lay still, her eyes vacant, a shell of the person she once was. John couldn't take it anymore. He started sabotaging the experiments, tampering with the equipment, and secretly freeing subjects when he could. But he knew it was only a matter of time before his actions were discovered. One night, John was awakened by a loud banging on his door. He grabbed his gun and cautiously approached. Before he could react, the door was kicked in, and black-clad soldiers stormed his house. They pinned him to the ground, binding his hands and blindfolding him. As they dragged him out, he could hear the hybrid crying out from its hiding place. John was taken to an interrogation room, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear. A man in a suit entered, his eyes cold and calculating. He introduced himself as Mr. Gray and explained that John had been under surveillance for months. They knew about his sabotage, his attempts to expose the project, and his escape with the hybrid. Mr. Gray didn't resort to physical torture. Instead, he used psychological tactics, playing recordings of the hybrid's screams, showing videos of the experiments, and describing in detail what would happen to John if he didn't cooperate. John held out as long as he could, but eventually he broke. He was forced to reveal the location of the hybrid. In the following days, John was returned to his home, but he was a changed man. He was under constant surveillance, his every move monitored. The hybrid was taken back to the facility, its fate sealed. The final entries in this part of the journal were disjointed, filled with paranoia and fear. John wrote about strange occurrences, lights flickering, shadows moving on their own, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. He felt like he was being watched, not just by the government, but by something else, something otherworldly. One night, he described waking up to find a figure standing at the foot of his bed. It was tall and slender, with large black eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. It didn't speak, but John felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure raised a hand, and John blacked out. When he came to, he was alone, but the fear remained. He knew he had to do something, anything, to stop what was happening. The journal ended with a desperate plan to expose the truth to the public. He wrote about gathering evidence, compiling records, and preparing to go public. I knew I had to continue sharing John's story. There was too much at stake. The more I read, the more I realized the depth of the conspiracy and the lengths to which those involved would go to keep it hidden. But with every revelation, the danger grew. I could feel the weight of John's words pressing down on me, the fear of retribution lurking in the shadows. After posting part 2, I started noticing strange things happening around me. The night after, I was woken by the sound of my front door creaking open. My heart pounded as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and crept downstairs. The door was wide open, but there was no sign of forced entry. I could have sworn I locked it before going to bed. As I closed it and double-checked the lock, a cold chill ran down my spine. Someone or something had been inside. Determined to find out more about John's story, I continued reading the journal. The next section was a deep dive into the government's cover-up operations and the extreme lengths they went to keep their secrets buried. John had become obsessed with exposing the truth, and his entries grew increasingly erratic and paranoid. John had managed to get his hands on some classified documents hidden deep within the facility where the hybrids were kept. These documents detailed an operation known as Project Sphinx, a joint venture between the government and the Equerries. The project aimed to create a perfect hybrid, a being with the physical resilience and intellect of the Equerries, but with the emotional and psychological traits of humans. They believed such a hybrid would be the ultimate weapon, capable of infiltrating and controlling any society. John described one of the most disturbing experiments he witnessed. They had captured a young boy, no older than 10, from a small rural town. His parents had reported him missing, but no one knew the truth. The boy was subjected to the same brutal experiments as the other subjects. John wrote about the look of absolute terror on the boy's face as the scientists performed their procedures, implanting alien technology into his brain and forcing him through unimaginable pain. What made this particular experiment even more horrifying was the way the boy's humanity was stripped away piece by piece. He started to lose his sense of self, his memories, and his emotions. By the end of the process, he was a hollow shell, an obedient puppet ready to be controlled. John's guilt was overwhelming. He had seen countless horrors, but this one haunted him the most. John knew he couldn't fight this alone. He reached out to an old friend, someone he trusted implicitly. This friend, who I'll call Mike, was an investigative journalist. John shared everything he had gathered: documents, videos, recordings. Mike was initially skeptical, but the evidence was too compelling to ignore. They devised a plan to go public, to blow the lid off Project Sphinx and expose the government's horrific experiments. However, the plan went horribly wrong. Mike was found dead in his apartment, the victim of an apparent suicide. But John knew better. The scene was too clean, too perfect. Mike had been silenced, and it was only a matter of time before they came for John. John's paranoia reached a fever pitch. He described seeing men in black suits everywhere he went, feeling their eyes on him constantly. His house was broken into multiple times, but nothing was ever taken. They were sending a message. They could get to him whenever they wanted. The journal entries from this period were fragmented and chaotic. John wrote about nightmares that felt too real, waking up with unexplained bruises and cuts. He mentioned losing time, entire hours disappearing with no recollection of what had happened. It was clear he was being drugged, manipulated. But by whom? The government? The Akaris? Or both? One night, John wrote about a particularly terrifying experience. He woke up in the middle of the woods, miles from his home, with no memory of how he got there. He was disoriented, shivering from the cold, and completely alone. As he stumbled through the darkness, he felt a presence following him. He could hear whispers in a language he didn't understand, echoing through the trees. Eventually, he found his way to a road and flagged down a passing car. The driver, an elderly man, looked at John with a mixture of fear and pity. He said nothing as he drove John back to his house. When John tried to ask what had happened, the man simply shook his head and drove away quickly. Once John got out, John was unraveling. His writings became more desperate, more frantic. He was losing his grip on reality, haunted by the faces of the hybrids, the screams of the tortured, and the constant fear of being hunted. He knew he had to act quickly to expose the truth before it was too late. The final entries in this part of the journal were chilling. John wrote about finding hidden cameras in his home, bugs in his phone, and even his car being tampered with. He felt like a rat in a cage, watched from every angle. But he also mentioned one last piece of evidence, something that could blow the entire operation wide open. He didn't specify what it was, but he was adamant it would be enough to bring down everyone involved. As I finished this part of the journal, a sense of dread settled over me. The more I read, the more real it all felt. This wasn't just a story. It was a desperate cry for help from a man who had seen too much. I knew I had to keep sharing his story, to continue uncovering the truth, no matter the cost. The fear in John's journal was contagious, seeping into my own life. After posting part 3, I started noticing a car that seemed to be following me wherever I went. I'd see it parked down the street from my house, or trailing a few cars behind me on my way to work. It was a black SUV with tinted windows, and every time I tried to get a good look, it would turn off or disappear. Determined to keep going, I dove back into John's journal. The next entries detailed his frantic efforts to gather the final piece of evidence. He described breaking into a government facility, a high-risk move that underscored his desperation. He knew his time was running out. John meticulously planned the break-in, using his knowledge of the facility's layout and security protocols. He chose a stormy night, hoping the weather would mask his movements. The facility was heavily guarded, with surveillance cameras, motion detectors, and armed patrols. John managed to bypass the initial security, using stolen credentials and a bit of old-fashioned stealth. Once inside, he headed to the lower levels, where the most sensitive information was stored. He knew exactly where to go. An archive room containing classified documents on Project Sphinx. John described the room as a vault, lined with file cabinets and digital servers, the air thick with the scent of old paper and metal. He found what he was looking for in a locked cabinet, a thick dossier labeled Top Secret Eyes Only. The dossier contained detailed reports on the experiments, photographs, and even video footage. John's hands shook as he flipped through the pages, his worst fears confirmed. The photographs were the most disturbing. Images of hybrids in various stages of development, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. One photo showed a hybrid child, its eyes wide with fear, its tiny body covered in surgical scars. But it was the videos that truly horrified him. John watched in stunned silence as scientists conducted brutal experiments, their subjects screaming in pain. The footage showed everything: vivisections, forced breeding, mind control procedures. It was undeniable proof of the atrocities being committed in the name of science and national security. John knew he had to get this evidence out, but as he prepared to leave, an alarm sounded. He had been discovered. He described the sheer panic that gripped him as he raced through the facility, dodging security personnel and navigating the labyrinthine corridors. He barely made it out, escaping into the stormy night with the dossier clutched tightly under his arm. John went into hiding, using safe houses and burner phones to avoid detection. He reached out to underground contacts, people he trusted to help him distribute the evidence. But the government was relentless. They tracked him down, forcing him to stay on the move constantly. In his final days, John's journal entries became increasingly erratic. He wrote about feeling a constant presence, an oppressive force that seemed to know his every move. He was plagued by nightmares, seeing the faces of the hybrids every time he closed his eyes. He knew he was close to the end, but he was determined to see his mission through. One entry detailed a harrowing encounter with what he called the Watchers, figures in dark suits who seemed to appear out of nowhere, always watching, always waiting. They didn't speak, but their mere presence was enough to fill him with dread. John described a night when he woke up to find one of them standing at the foot of his bed, just like before. This time, however, he didn't black out. Instead, the figure leaned in close, its cold breath on his face, and whispered a single word. Soon. John's last entry was the most chilling. He wrote about a final plan to expose the truth, a meeting with a contact who promised to help him get the evidence to the public. But there was a sense of finality in his words, a resignation to his fate. He knew he wouldn't survive much longer, but he was determined to make sure the truth got out. The journal ended abruptly. There were no more entries, no indication of what happened to John. I sat back, feeling a mix of horror and determination. John's story couldn't end here. The world needed to know about the atrocities, about the hybrids, about the truth. As I prepared to post part 4, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was simple: "Stop now, or you're next." I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. They knew. They were watching me. I knew posting part 4 would put me in even more danger, but I couldn't stop now. John's story had to be told, no matter the cost. I hit post and waited, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me like a shroud. The moment I posted part 4, the reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just sharing a story anymore. I was part of it. The text message was a clear warning, but I couldn't back down now. I needed to see this through to the end. I locked my doors and windows, double-checked my security cameras, and settled in to read the last part of John's journal. The final entries were short and fragmented, as if he was writing them in a hurry, always looking over his shoulder. John had arranged to meet his contact in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. This contact was someone high up, someone who had seen the inside of these operations and wanted out. John described the journey to the cabin, how he felt eyes on him the whole way, the oppressive silence of the forest broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. When John arrived, he found the cabin empty, just as they had agreed. The plan was to wait for a signal before the contact would arrive. Hours passed, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows. John described how every creak and groan of the old wooden structure set his nerves on edge. Finally, he heard the signal. 3 knocks on the door. He opened it to find a woman standing there, her face partially hidden by a hood. She introduced herself as Dr. Emily Cross, a former lead scientist on Project Sphinx. Her eyes were haunted, her voice trembling as she spoke. She handed John a small unmarked envelope, telling him it contained the final piece of evidence he needed. Dr. Cross revealed that the hybrids were more than just experiments. They were being weaponized. The government and their Akaris had created an elite force of hybrids, trained to infiltrate and destabilize any perceived threat. These hybrids had been implanted with control devices that allowed their handlers to command them telepathically, turning them into perfect soldiers, assassins, and spies. As Dr. Cross spoke, John felt a growing sense of dread. She warned him that the hybrids had been unleashed, and they were hunting anyone who knew too much. John realized that they were not just after him, they were after anyone who had come into contact with the journal or the evidence. The cabin's atmosphere grew tense. Dr. Cross urged John to leave immediately and head to a safe house where a group of whistleblowers was gathering to plan their next move. But just as they were about to leave, they heard it, a low guttural growl coming from outside. John described the terror that gripped him as he peeked through the window. Outside, in the dim light of the moon, stood a hybrid. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its body moved with a predatory grace. John knew they had to act fast. He and Dr. Cross barricaded the door and grabbed whatever weapons they could find, a rusty axe and a kitchen knife. The hybrid attacked, smashing through the window with terrifying speed and strength. John fought with everything he had, but it was like battling a nightmare. The hybrid's strength was overwhelming, its eyes cold and unfeeling. Dr. Cross was thrown across the room, her head hitting the wall with a sickening thud. John managed to land a blow with the axe, momentarily stunning the hybrid. He grabbed the envelope from Dr. Cross's hand and made a run for it, knowing she wouldn't make it. He fled into the forest, the sounds of the hybrid's pursuit echoing in his ears. His final journal entry was a frantic scrawl, written as he hid in a hollowed-out tree. He described the envelope's contents: a small USB drive containing video footage, documents, and a list of names, all linked to Project Sphinx. It was the smoking gun he needed, but he knew he wouldn't survive to see it exposed. John's last words were a plea for anyone who found the journal to take the USB drive and reveal the truth. He wrote about feeling the hybrid's presence closing in, the inevitability of his fate, and his hope that his death wouldn't be in vain. When I finished reading, I sat back, the weight of John's story pressing down on me. The USB drive was still in the envelope, sitting on my desk. I knew what I had to do. I made multiple copies of the drive, sending them to trusted contacts and uploading the contents to secure servers. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a noise outside my window, a low guttural growl. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows seemed to move, and I could feel eyes on me. The hybrid was out there, waiting. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm determined to see this through. The world needs to know the truth about Project Sphinx, about the hybrids, and the government's dark alliance with the Akaris. If you're reading this, be careful. They're watching, and they'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. Stay vigilant. The truth is out there, and it's more terrifying than we ever imagined.